Hi everybody, it's Judy here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel and thank you so much for watching today's video, for subscribing, for returning and enjoying my content. It really means a lot to me. Today I want to talk about low light tolerant plants. It is currently winter here in Australia, which means less light. The sun is constantly hid behind the clouds and you may still want some plants to brighten up your space. Or it may not be winter where you are and you still want some plants to brighten up a space in your home that doesn't get any bright indirect light or bright direct light or light at all. Now, it goes without saying, well, it probably doesn't go without saying or I wouldn't be saying this disclaimer, but when I talk about low light tolerant plants, it's that they're tolerant of low light. It doesn't mean no light. They still need some type of light source, whether it's sun that comes in through the window throughout the day, whether it's even just for a few hours through the day. But these plants or no plants are really going to survive in a room with absolutely no light at all whatsoever. So that's just something that I need to define before I start talking about these plants. And the fact that they're tolerant of low light means that they will still live and they will still grow, but they will grow very, very slowly and they may not necessarily thrive within that space. If you find you're putting your plants in a low light space, but that space also doesn't have any warmth or any airflow or humidity, chances are your plants are probably going to actually start to decline within that space. So if you're not going to be able to provide them with a light source, maybe try at least give them a bit of warmth, a bit of humidity, and a bit of airflow, or maybe like at least 2 of the 4 main things that plants generally need in order to be able to grow. Also remembering that if you have plants within a low lit space, you're not going to need to water them as often as well because they're not absorbing up as much water with growth or with the sunlight and warmth drying up the water within the soil as quickly as they would in a brighter lit spot. So these are just things that I need to explain and tell you before talking about these plants. But with that out of the way, I'm going to start with plant number 1. Plant number 1 is probably the number 1 plant that's mentioned when asked low light tolerant plants, and that plant is the ZZ Zenzi or Zanzibar Gem plant. I've got a few of these around in my house because there are spaces in my house that don't get any bright direct light or bright indirect light throughout the day at all, and I still want plants in those spaces because I just want plants all throughout my house. And in those corners I have the ZZ plant. The marketing line for the ZZ plant is thrives on neglect, and this generally does. I mean, it does need water when the soil is completely dried out, and sometimes it's okay to just even go for weeks between waterings even after it's dried out, especially during the colder months. I personally only fertilize this in the growing season, like spring and summer. I also find them to be a little bit slower growing plants in general, even when I do have them in a more brightly lit space. The beautiful thing about this plant is that even though it thrives or survives or tolerates low lit areas, the leaves will still grow out beautiful and glossy and green, and it doesn't have that peaked color of yellow or faded or what's the word, just lackluster type leaves. It will still grow beautiful glossy green leaves even though it's in a darker lit space. And this is the number 1 plant that I would recommend when looking for plants to put in a darker room. What I love about this plant is that it can actually get quite large. I have a really, really big one in my hallway and I'll put a bit of B-roll here for it. But it's actually quite huge. I already bought it that big, but since getting it, it's put out several brand new shoots. These ZZ plants are also quite easy to separate and to propagate. They grow from bulbs, so it's not really the kind of plant that you can take cuttings from in terms of finding nodes and propagating from those. But the thing with this is you can chop a stem, pop that in a glass of water, and within a few months it will start to grow some roots and you can propagate that way as well. It is a very slow plant to propagate as well, so it just takes a bit of patience and time to propagate these plants, and you can also propagate them from the leaves. I personally haven't done that, but I have seen it done successfully, so there's something that you can do as well. With the leaves, you just take off a leaf, pop the bottom of the leaf in the soil, and supposedly that's meant to grow out a brand new plant. But again, I know that it takes some time. So the ZZ plant is the #1 plant I would recommend for low lit spaces. It is so beautiful though, it's quite structural, it can get quite big, and it can fill in a space quite well. If you're wanting to fill in a space with a plant, just get one of these. They grow quite big, but don't be afraid that it'll outgrow your space, because it's not one of those prolific growers. You'll catch it before it gets too big. And then when it gets really big, it's very easy to separate the bulbs from each other. Just take them out, pot it in another pot, and it'll keep on living its best life within that pot. These ZZ plants also like to be root bound, so you're not going to want to repot them very often or disturb the roots very often. Often it's just one of those plants that it's an introvert plant. If plants had personalities, it's an introvert. One of those. It's one of those. All right, let's move on to the next plant. And the next one is a Rojo or Rojo, I don't know how you say it, but I say Rojo Congo Philodendron, and most philodendrons in general are quite low light tolerant. I have it in a darker, it's not actually super dark, but it doesn't have bright direct light for a majority of the day in my lounge room, and any light that it does get is probably 45 minutes of afternoon sun coming in through the living room window, and the rest of the day is just secondary light that comes from the window or from anywhere else in the house. It's actually putting out some brand new growth in the center there. I don't know if you can see. It is a fairly warm space with a good amount of airflow coming through as well. So while it doesn't have a great amount of light, it does have those other things which I can provide it, which means it's still doing okay. It's not the fastest grower for me, and I have also struggled with bacterial spots or fungal growth spots on the leaves, which also are kind of related to spider mites. I think spider mites leave, speaking of spider mites, I think this one has it. Yeah, just a tiny little spot of spider mites there, but it's fairly easy to treat, especially since the leaves are quite large. Spider mites tend to leave a fair bit of damage on the Rojo Congo Philodendron when they do present themselves, because it just shows up really well. You know how sometimes leaves can mask the look of pests quite well? Well, it shows on this because they start to develop little spots on the leaves, and they're very, very easy to spot. It's one of those things that you just kind of got to keep an eye on them, but because the leaves are quite large, not small and dainty, it's fairly easy to eradicate spider mites. I've treated this plant a few times for spider mites, and it seems to be still going quite well. It's a beautiful big plant. It has about 4 or 5 or 6 plants within the one pot, and it's quite big. It was already big when I bought it, but she's really gone quite well actually, even considering the fact that it's in a fairly lowly lit spot in my lounge room. It's probably brighter than most other spaces, but for me, in relation to my house, it's a fairly low lit spot. So Rojo Congo Philodendron, it will be okay. I need to arrange this in a way that it doesn't actually cover my face. Maybe I'll just put it to the side here. There we go. The next plant that I want to talk about is actually a spider plant. This is a curly spider plant, prolific grower. I've got it on one of the lower shelves in my bedroom, and it gets a few, maybe like an hour of morning sunlight, and then throughout the day, the rest of the light it gets is just indirect light. It's lower light, the sun moves on, and then the light that it gets, it's a few feet, several feet away from the window, and it seems to be going quite well. It was in a tiny little 4-inch pot when I first bought it, and that was about 6 months ago, and look at it now. It's throwing off several little baby plants too. Spider plants, fairly easy to propagate. All you gotta do is take that bit there, pop the bottom bit of that little baby spider in some soil, and that's gonna grow a whole brand new plant. I would actually cut that off, pop it back within the pot with a mother plant, cover in some of those boulder spots there, and it'll fill in the pot even more. I find that this plant is actually quite tolerant of longer, drier periods as well. Sometimes I won't water this for a couple months, several weeks. It actually needs water now, but it's still going okay. If anything, it'll probably present a few dry tips like this, but the rest of the plant is doing okay. Because it is quite a fast grower, regardless of where it is sitting in relation to light, I actually feed this plant, or try to remember to feed this plant every single time I water, and that's really only when the soil is dry. I just let it sit in my shower for about 5-10 minutes, let the water do its thing. Ugh, spider! Let it do its thing in the shower, and then I come in with a watering can of fertilizer, drench the soil through, let it drain, then put it back in its spot. And I do that every time I water, or try to remember to do it every time I water, and the thing just keeps on growing. It's also one of those plants that the leaves die off fairly quickly, so you're gonna want to go through quite often and just pick out the dead foliage. That'll help prevent any rotting at the base of the plant, and removing all the dead foliage will help encourage brand new growth to keep coming through as well. Also, if you see any brown spots on the leaves, just cut them off or pull them off. It's pretty easy to keep this plant happy, very, very easy to grow, and does quite well in lowly lit areas. Look how beautiful it is. I can't wait till this one gets really big. I've seen some of these where they get big and there's the mother plant hanging there and all the tiny little baby plants hanging down below. I can't wait till this one gets that big, but she definitely needs a water right now. I'll do that when I finish this video. All right, the next one is a snake plant, or you can call them Sansiveria. These are two varieties of snake plant right here. They typically grow well in bright, direct sun. I've seen them growing outdoors in the full bright sunlight, and I believe that's where they natively come from, and they just grow like weeds in that condition. However, these are actually so hardy, they are fine in low lit areas. They'll just sit there and do their thing, literally. Water when the soil is dry. Actually probably leave a fair bit of time between waterings even after the soil is dry, and they're doing fine. They are probably some of the most difficult plants to kill. They just sit there and do their thing. They actually like being root bound as well. So I very, very rarely have to repot any of my snake plants. I don't know, there's really not much more to say about them except that these would be super good in low lit areas, in spaces where they doesn't get very much light at all, and they just sit there and do their thing. It's almost like they are a living fake plant. Throughout the spring and summer they will start to put out a lot more new growth, but these are probably the number two. I know I didn't mention it, number two in this video, but these are probably the number two plants I would recommend for low lit spaces after the Zanzibar, the ZZ Gem plant. Would definitely recommend snake plants. These are also really easy to propagate as well. Same as the ZZ plant, you can cut a leaf at the base, pop that either into some damp soil or a glass of water, and it'll start to form roots at the bottom. You can also take a leaf as well, cut it into segments, pop that in water and soil, and from the bottom of each segment of leaf, that will start to grow new roots as well. So it's very, very easy to propagate and to multiply. I would really just recommend doing that during the growing season, not right now, depending where you are living, but it is winter in Australia. While these plants are very hardy, I would still recommend giving them something to eat, especially during the growing season. I haven't actually fed or fertilized these plants for a little while because they really are one of those plants where they just sit there and do their thing, and I just leave them be and they don't complain from the neglect at all. They're very, very easy plants to grow. And I feel that while some people don't really like the look of these plants, I feel like they're quite structural. They need a space in order to stand out. And in some spaces, a very tall plant is what you need. Snake plants are it. I like them. I like them a lot. And you can get them in so many different varieties as well. If you don't like one single look, in snake plants, they come with thicker leaves as well. They come with shorter, stumpier leaves. They don't all look like this, but within the same family, there are so many different varieties. So if you don't want to be stuck with one look type plant, but want to get this many plants with the same type of care needs or lack of care needs really, then go with the snake plants. You cannot go wrong. They're really, really super easy. The next one is a Gloden Pothos. I feel like I can't record any of my YouTube videos without mentioning the Gloden Pothos because it's just so easy to take care of. They will sit there and do their thing. They are some of the easiest plants to take care of. Low lit spot, they will still actually grow as long as it's warm and you don't overwater them and you water them when the soil is dry. So easy. Like, I don't really know much more that I can say about this plant. I feel like I repeat myself in a lot of my videos, but it's actually so easy to take care of plants. I mean, there are a few fussy ones, sure, like Calathea and some Syngonium, some Alocasia. They require a bit more than general care, but as a general rule, plants need warmth, humidity, feed during the growing season, water when the soil is dry. And sure, these plants need light in order to really grow and thrive, but they are so tolerant of lower lit spaces, they're gonna be fine. They're gonna be fine. And if they're not fine and your space actually doesn't have any light at all, they'll let you know, and all you gotta do is move them and maybe find something like a snake plant or a ZZ plant or a fake one. Although it hurts my soul to recommend fake plants, but sometimes you just don't have any light, and the only plant that I would recommend for a no light space is a fake one, because you really don't want to subject these living things to no light at all. It's like putting someone in solitary confinement. They're gonna go crazy. If you don't give your plants any light at all, like any light at all, chances are they're just gonna die. But yeah, Gloden Pothos, very easy to grow, very easy to propagate as well, and it's just one of those plants that I would recommend for any space, whether it's brightly lit or lowly lit, and it just looks beautiful in every single space. I actually propagated this whole plant from my mother plant up here. I don't know if you can see it, but I have this one. This is a Gloden Pothos. She's huge. She is enormous. And I have propagated so many little extra pots from that mother plant. So easy to grow, guys. Like, if you are a beginner in plants and you haven't quite yet figured out plant needs, start with a Gloden Pothos and then work your way from there. Definitely would recommend this. This is also good for the shelves, put on shelves where you want plants that hang down, especially if there are shelves in, like I'm talking about, lowly lit spaces at the moment, where at the top of the shelf there's not much light at the top, but you still want something that hangs down. Gloden Pothos definitely would work well in that spot. Alongside with the Gloden Pothos is the hardleaf Philodendron. That's another low light tolerant plant. I don't have it here at the moment next to me, so I'm not going to pick it up and show you, but I'll put a bit of B-roll here and show you what it looks like. Hardleaf Philodendron is kind of on the same page as this Gloden Pothos, where it's easy care, is tolerant of low light spaces, and as a general rule is a very, very easy plant to grow. The next plant I want to talk about is actually a Stromanthe or Stromanthe. This is a plant that is a part of the prayer plant variety family. It's beautiful. Look at the undersides of these leaves. They're so big and glossy. They're like huge green and pink and white swords. While this plant is generally much better growing in a space that does get light, it is okay in lower lit conditions. It's one of those plants that's also very easy to propagate. It's not so much one that you can like take cuttings from, but it's one of those plants that as it grows and multiplies, it starts to shoot new growth from the bottom of the plant and just pushes out new growth from there. And then when it's really big, you can take it out and separate the roots and you'll get a whole bunch of new plants, baby plants from the base of the Stromanthe. What I love about this is that it's actually so easy. All I give it is warmth, humidity, airflow. You know, those are all the main things that plants need. Light, yes, too, but it is quite tolerant in a space that doesn't get as much of the bright indirect light from my window. She's just sitting there doing her thing, living her best life, and even with the colder weather is still pushing out some new growth. So that's gotta say something about this plant. The next few plants I'm going to talk about I don't actually physically have here with me, but another plant that is really super tolerant of low light conditions is the peace lily, or Spathiphyllum if you want to be scientific with the names. Peace lily apparently is very, very easy to grow. It's one of those plants that is like super easy care. Water when the soil is dry. When the soil is dry, it can be quite dramatic. All the leaves will droop, and then you give it a drink and it'll just pop back up to life again. That's the peace lily. They're generally pretty common plants and quite easy to find. You can find them in smaller sizes as well, and you can also find them in really big, majestic size plants. There is a plant size for every space. Very easy to care for. I personally don't have one because I don't like them. They just never liked me. But I have heard, but I'm telling you that they're easy care plants because that's the general consensus. I think I'm just, it's my nemesis. Everyone's gotta have a nemesis plant. For me, it's the peace lily. I kind of want to try again because I hate being defeated, but at the same time, I don't really want to try again. But yeah, peace lily is another low light tolerant plant. Another plant that you could put in a low lit space are the Peperomia. Any of those plants in the Peperomia variety will be okay in a lower lit space. They still do need some type of light source though, whether it's a window on the other far side of the room. They cannot live in a space that has no light at all whatsoever, but they will be okay in a low lit space. I have my Peperomia currently sitting on my bookshelf where the light comes through maybe 45 minutes of the day in the afternoon. So it's not even morning sunlight, which is the best sunlight for plant growth, by the way. Morning sunlight is the best. Afternoon sunlight can tend to be quite harsh, especially in the summer, so just keep an eye on that. Like I was saying, my Peperomia are sitting on my bookshelf, which have fairly low bookshelf spaces, so the tops of the plants aren't really getting very much light at all, and the backs of the plants are getting no light at all, really, because they are facing the back of the bookshelf. I periodically rotate my Peperomia because Peperomia are those plants that kind of move and their leaves automatically turn towards the light. Wherever the light is, you'll see their, not like this fast, but over time, you'll see the face of the foliage kind of lift their heads up and face toward wherever the light is coming from. So with the Peperomia, if I have them sitting on a shelf for a long time and I forget to rotate them, once I turn it around, you can visibly see a bald spot at the back. So every few weeks I rotate it just a little bit, and then next week I rotate it again and just another little bit. Rotation is very important for plants as well because it ensures and it encourages an even growth all the way around the plant, especially if it's in a lower lit spot too. So if there is any light at all, you're going to want to make sure that the plant receives it evenly all the way around, so you're not left with a plant with a visible front. You kind of want plants that have a healthy growth of leaves all the way around the plant, and that's what I do with my Peperomia. I'm not overly successful with Peperomia. I kind of struggle with them, but I have found that if I don't touch them too much because the leaves are quite fragile, they'll be okay. They also don't like to be watered from the top because it's very easy to rot the stems because they have a bit more of a succulent-y feel on the leaves. I bottom water all my Peperomia. Those are the only plants of mine that I actually bottom water. Everything else I just throw it in the shower and let them drink up all the water in there. But Peperomia I bottom water so I don't get the leaves wet and the immediate roots near the base of the plant wet as well, because they actually rot and go soft quite easy. So bottom watering for Peperomia is my #1 tip, and yeah, they will thrive. Oh, not thrive, they will survive in lower lit spaces. I know I'm talking a lot about the other care of plants as well, but I mean, I'm talking about plants that are okay in low lit spaces, and what else am I supposed to talk about? So I just want to be able to give a little bit of information about these plants to you guys as well. Another plant that is quite tolerant of low light spaces is the Rattlesnake Calathea. I used to have a bigger one, but I killed it from overwatering. I didn't kill it completely because I managed to salvage this tiniest little bit at the base, and I currently have it potted in a pot with some other prayer plants, and I just have them all sitting together in that. And I also have it on a shelf that doesn't really get a whole lot of light, and it's doing fine. It's actually doing okay, and it's put out a few new leaves in the last month or so, but it's not growing very fast at the moment because it is winter and it is cold. I don't have a very large one of it to show as an example to you guys, but I have heard that the Rattlesnake Calathea is also one that is okay in lower lit spot. It does need humidity though. It's a Calathea, so humidity, it just goes without saying for Calathea, they need humidity. The last plant I want to talk about is a Parlour Palm. Now, this is my Parlour Palm. This has tripled in size since I got it. And for a while I had it in a space near my window where it had a lot of bright indirect light all day long. But since winter came around, I had to reshuffle all my plants and make sure that the plants that aren't low light tolerant were actually closer to the window or the light source. And I moved this up on the shelf over here because it doesn't get any like indirect sunlight in this space here like the plants in the window do. This plant is okay. Now it's not exactly a super low lit spot here, but like I said, it doesn't get any indirect sunlight at all. It gets what I like to call secondhand sunlight. And it's going okay. It's actually got a brand new frond, or what do you call it, a frond leaf coming through there. There is a couple new growth points coming at the base there as well. So, I mean, it's going okay. She's going okay in a spot with not much bright indirect light. It's going all right. So that's another plant that is tolerant of low lit spaces. I don't really know what else to say other than here's a plant, here's your low lit space, put it there. I've run out of things to say. So I guess that's the last plant that I'm going to talk about in this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a plant that you know is okay in low lit spaces, and I didn't mention it in this video, I would love for you to leave that plant recommendation in the comments down below, so anybody else who is searching for a plant suitable to their space, they can get your suggestions as well. Let's have a conversation down there, and I would love to know what is your favorite plant in your lowly lit space. For me, my favorite plant to put in low lit spaces is the ZZ plant, the Zanzibar Gem. It's just so unproblematic, this plant. That's it for this video, I guess. I'm gonna sign it off right here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you've chosen to spend your time here with Fungus Nat. Please like the video if you did, subscribe if you haven't, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye!